What is the disturbing backstory behind something that is widely considered wholesome? Story 1. Canonically, Chuck E. Cheese is an orphan who never knew when his birthday was, so he celebrates other people's birthdays to fill the terrible painful void of his abandonment. Story 2. Sherman Kelly wrote the lyrics to Dancing in the Moonlight while recovering from a violent assault carried out on him and his girlfriend by a youth gang. He envisioned an alternative reality where people just dance and be happy all the time. It was his way of dealing with the trauma. Story 3. Voice actor for classic Disney Peter Pan died alone of a drug overdose in an abandoned warehouse after years of being unable to get work in Hollywood later in life. Story 4. Candyland was invented during the polio epidemic by retired schoolteacher Eleanor Abbott, who herself was recovering from polio. She invented the game to keep children entertained during their hospital stays who themselves were affected. Story 5. The song Save the Last Dance for Me by the Drifters was written by a man who was crippled by polio and in a wheelchair watching his new wife dancing with other men at his wedding to her because he couldn't. Ide did not expect this to start such a discussion, as was mentioned below. In the song he's saying that he's the one taking her home, not them. I don't think he's angry, he's just saying that no matter who she dances with, she's his wife and will be taking her home at the end of the night. Story 6. The girl who voiced Ducky in The Land Before Time was shot to death by her father, along with her mother. Edit to include the details on the wiki page. Her name was Judith Barcy. Story 7. I met a writer named Thomas Dish when I was in college. He wrote The Brave Little Toaster. He told us Disney hired him to write a movie about lions. He wanted to do King Lear with lions. BC. The plot mirrored how lion prides operate: old lazy but powerful male, dangerous daughters. But Disney said they wanted a young hero. So he changed it to Hamlet with lion's uncle kills father, kid runs away, ghost of dad visits and calls for revenge, etc. But with a happy ending. Timon Pumbaa or Rosencrantz Guildenstern wrote the script, turned it in, they said thanks but no thanks and fired him. Movie comes out, they took his idea and didn't pay him. He said Disney was notorious for doing this to creators. I read years later that he took his own life. Never think of the Lion King without thinking about him. They made so much money off his idea and he got nothing. Story 8. Hello Kitty was made as part of a national movement to cutiefy Japan to distract from the abominable war crimes they committed in the Second World War. Story 9. In the animated film, All Dogs Go to Heaven, the little girl who plays Amory was murdered by her father prior to the film being released. Burt Reynolds struggled hard to finish recording his scene where Charlie says goodbye to the little girl one last time before going to heaven. It's a tear-inducing scene without knowing the backstory, but you can absolutely hear the pain in Burt Reynolds' voice. It's generally considered a very loving and touching moment, but knowing what happened makes it really hard to listen to that without getting emotional. Her father was a violent and abusive alcoholic who murdered both her and her mom, and then committed suicide. She was 10 years old. Edit: oh man, I just realized more people commented about this here. I also didn't realize she voiced Ducky from The Land Before Time too. Story 10. The song Pumped Up Kicks is catchy and was used in things like commercials and children's parties years ago. It's also pretty clearly about committing a school shooting. Story 11. The kids' book Love You Forever by Robert Munsch. As Long as I'm Living, My Baby You'll Be was written in the wake of the stillbirth of the author and his wife's 2 babies. Story 12. Bananas. You thought cocaine was a blood-soaked cartel and war-driven commodity. The banana trade makes cocaine look like a farmer's market. Also chocolate, coffee, tea, spices and most tropical fruits, and meat and seafood, basically everything we eat, wear and use. Story 13. When I was 10 or so, my sisters and I were doing a common counting rhyme to pick something, maybe who went first in a game. Eeny meeny miny mo, catch a tiger by the toe if he hollers. Let him go. Eeny meeny miny mo. My dad walked by and quietly commented, when I was your age, that word wasn't tiger, but we didn't know better back then. Story 14. The Volkswagen Beetle was a beloved car with a quirky design. It was also commissioned by order of Adolf Hitler, designed by Ferdinand Porsche as an affordable, practical vehicle for the German public. Its original name was the KDF wagon, which was an abbreviation of the Hitler Youth motto Kraft durch Freude, strength through joy. Story 15. Went to a community event last night and 32 years later, Macarena still fills the dance floor. A bunch of teens learn the dance for the very first time. The lyrics are, of course, in Spanish, and about the titular Macarena having a threesome with her boyfriend's friends while he's swearing his military oath. Also interesting is that the band played traditional music primarily, and this was their first pop release. In their 50s, they went back to traditional music after. Story 16. The little girl who played Matilda, in the movie Matilda, mom died before the movie was released of cancer. I believe the director showed her a rough cut before she passed, but geez, that made me sad to learn as an adult. Edit: thank you everyone who reminded me the director was Danny DeVito. Story 17. Pugs and other similar dog breeds suffer all their lives because of selective breeding, leading to the deformation of their faces, legs, bodies and skin, plus cardiac and respiratory issues. I really hope they get extinct someday. I can't bear watching such an aberration of nature due to human vanity. No thing must suffer their entire life only to look cute or adorable or luxury. Story 18. Coco Channel was a supporter of the Nazi Party, i.e. she was a Nazi. Edited for brevity and clarification. Lots of good resources listed below in the comments. Always be sure to cite your sources when sharing, thanks. Story 19. Dancing in the Moonlight. Sherman Kelly and his girlfriend were beaten with a baseball bat and almost killed, and his girlfriend was additionally raped by a gang in St. Croix whilst on the beach. he wrote Dancing in the Moonlight as an alternate reality of that night as he wanted to believe in a better world than the one he experienced. Story 20 Semi-Charmed Life by Third Eye Blind, the chorus of which was used by commercials and movie trailers in the 90s, is actually about being a drug addict. Story 21 Henry Ford promoted square dancing in public schools, starting in the 1920s. Sound wholesome? He did it because he hated Jews and thought they invented jazz. He wanted to get America back to traditional white and Christian music and dancing. Story 22 Resusci Annie, the rubbery anatomical model we learned CPR on. The face is modeled after the death mask of an unidentified and unclaimed woman who drowned in the Seine River in the late 1800s. Toymaker Smundes. Lertle chose to use the woman's face on the mannequin as he thought male trainees might be reluctant to kiss a man's face. The face was sculpted by the Norwegian-Danish sculptor Emma Mathiesen. Story 23 A bride having her father give her away comes from property transfers. Only men were full people. They owned their wives and children, girls and women were property, and had little choice in the matter. This was a transfer of ownership from the father to the husband. Story 24 Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, left behind a disturbing photographic collection of naked children. Edit he did the photography himself. For more on this issue, see the Lewis Carroll problem in The Artifice. Story 25 Canada's food guide was created by abusing and starving native children in residential schools. Story 26 The snake that's killed in Friday the 13th was a real snake. To make matters worse, it wasn't some wild snake they found in the woods. It was somebody's pet snake that had to watch his snake get killed. He apparently had no idea and had to be held back from punching the director. Story 27 The song My Sharona by the Knack was about the lead singer perving over a teenage girl. It's still a very catchy song on the surface, but it's still about wanting an underage girl. Story 28 Scottish Folds. Those cute cats with the folded ears. They have those ears because of osteochondrodysplasia. It causes joint, cartilage, and skeletal deformities. There is no treatment, only pain management. Those poor cats are in constant pain. Story 29 The song Marry You by Bruno Mars is not romantic. It's about something fun to do while drunk. It's a beautiful night, we're looking for something dumb to do. Hey baby, I think I want to marry you. Is it the look in your eyes? Or is it this dancing juice? Who cares baby? I think I want to marry you. Well, I know this little chapel on the boulevard, we can go, no one will know. Oh come on girl, who cares if we're trashed? Got a pocket full of cash, we can blow shots of Patron and it's on. Girl, if we wake up and you want to break up. That's cool, no, I won't blame you, it was fun. Girl, I laugh every time. People use this in proposals or as wedding songs. Story 30 Love languages were made by a man who wanted his wife to clean for him and him to have with her. So he said his love language was physical affection, but hers was acts of service. Story 31 The data, which is used for calculating the chances of naval rescue missions, comes from human experiments in concentration camps. They threw inmates in water tanks of different temperature and measured how long it took until they froze to death or drowned. Story 32 Alexander Graham Bell was a eugenicist against disabled and deaf people, which motivated his work for the telephone. He wrote an entire manifesto about preventing a death race. Story 33 I always prided myself on my ability to stay calm in an emergency and problem solve about the next best action to take, especially because I've struggled with depression and anxiety my whole life. Like, this was an area I knew I could count on myself and other people could count on me too. Friends, family and colleagues have often commented on it. Then a few years back when I found a really good therapist to help me deal with PTSD from growing up in an abusive, alcoholic household, she explained that being good in a crisis is a type of trauma response. I'm always in hyperarousal, on the lookout for danger. I've dealt with scary, unpredictable, dangerous situations since I was a kid. Of course I know what to do. I'm still proud of this ability. It just makes me sad to think how I came to have it. Story 34 Best Friends Animal Society was founded by Scientology members who formed their own cult spin-off, the Process Church. They associated with Charles Manson and David Berkowitz, with the author of Helter Skelter postulating that Manson was heavily influenced by Process. The rescue was originally a grift to keep their church going. They eventually moved to rescue full-time after realizing how incredibly lucrative and like their church tax-free it could be, with $200 million in assets, $314 million in 2024 revenue, and 2 private jets. You can see just how well their grift is paid off. Edit fixed and autocorrect. Story 35 Oneida Limited makes tableware and cutlery. They've been in business for nearly 2 centuries and started as a communist cult built around group marriage and male edging. Story 36 Milo and Otis is a cute, wholesome film about a cat and a dog on a crazy adventure, homeward bound style. But many animals were killed in making the movie. There's one scene where a cat falls down a waterfall in a box, and apparently that had to shoot that scene multiple times because the cats kept dying. Story 37 Pro Wrestling and WWE has a long filthy history of every criminal offense imaginable. Your favorite superstar growing up was likely at the very least a drug addict or supports problematic causes. At worst, a murderer or rapist. Never stopped them from marketing the product to children though. Story 38 The guy that lost 300 pounds by eating Subway didn't lose weight by eating Subway. He lost weight by walking daily to a particular Subway that wasn't even the nearest one, just so he could see an underage girl that worked at Subway. Story 39. The Roblox game Phantom Forces was a very popular and fun game in the first-person shooter community on Roblox. But last month everything was spilled. Some game devs were actual pedophiles who were furries. One dev mod even met up with a 16-year-old girl and did it. A couple of the Phantom Forces Discord mods, YouTubers, and even a dev I'm pretty sure on the game were even banned from the Discord server because they found out about the pedo stuff. Others who were told were given large amounts of Robux, the Roblox game currency that can be turned into real cash to keep the secret and not to talk about it. Story 40. Ghislaine Raza, the Star Wars kid, had his video posted onto Kaza without his permission by his schoolmates to prank him, and as a result, he was bullied at school. People made fun of him online, gave him death threats, told him to kill himself, all for pretending to be a Star Wars character, which is totally normal things kids do. He also had to go to a mental hospital, and his parents sued the kids who uploaded the video. Luckily, he returned to school to finish his senior year, went to McGill University in Montreal, got a law degree, and became president of his city's Heritage Society. Story 41. Free school lunches in America started because the military complained that during World War II that many 18-year-old men were too skinny to serve in the military. Free school lunches were added afterwards to make 18-year-old men strong enough to be drafted into the next war. Story 42. Fastball. The way it's a one-hit wonder song of the mid-late 90s written before the rest of the story was discovered. So much airtime, little less now. Peter Pan and the rest of the Lost Boys might actually be a metaphor of children who died. Speaking of which, Eric Clapton, Tears from Heaven, rough backstory if you don't know it. George Carlin taped a special September 10, 2001 where he went off on a whole tirade about how he loves it when lots of people are killed, all at once. The video was deleted and they did everything possible to scrub any evidence that it ever happened. Story 43. A. Milne based the stories on his son, Christopher Robin, but the real Christopher grew to resent the fame it brought him. Bullied and feeling exploited, he distanced himself from both his father and the beloved books. A tale of innocence, built on a child's unhappiness. Story 44. Both shoe brands Puma and Adidas are German. They were started by the brothers Rudolf and Adolf Dassler. They owned Dassler Brothers Shoe Factory 1924 and then separated to create two companies, Puma and Adidas, in 48. The name Adidas comes from Adolf's nickname Adi. Side note, when the company Nike was trying to launch in 1964, Adolf Dassler did everything in his power to prevent Nike from becoming successful. Now there is a very long-standing and very significant hatred of Adidas by Nike. Story 45. The song The Way sounds tonally inspirational, but it's a true story about an elderly couple whose car broke down and they got lost in the wilderness. They died alone but together. Story 46. Alfred Nobel, the creator of the Nobel Prize, was the inventor of dynamite, and amassed his wealth by developing, manufacturing and selling explosives, the weapons of mass destruction of his day. A French newspaper mistakenly published an obituary for his death when another arms manufacturer died, calling him the Merchant of Death. Seeing what his legacy was, and how he and his family name were going to be remembered, he changed his will to found the Nobel Prize. Story 47. I know Bob's Burgers isn't super wholesome, but it's generally agreed that it's pretty wholesome and tearjerker for an adult cartoon, and it started out being pitched as a burger restaurant run by a cannibal family. Story 48. Valentine's Day was named after a saint who was executed because he was marrying couples in private after marriages were banned because it made it easier to send people to war. Story 49. Ring Around the Roses is a nursery rhyme that is supposedly about bubonic plague. It references deadly rashes, and posies were supposed to be natural remedy to help with the rashes. Ashes refers to cremating the bodies so that the plague couldn't spread from corpses, and naturally we all fall down is alluding to everyone dying from illness. Next time you see a group of children standing in a circle singing this song, I promise I'll be a little eerie. Edit. Some of y'all are stating that the aforementioned info is most likely not true. This is why I stated supposedly in the initial post. Story 50. This is often mentioned in threads like what lively catchy song has dark lyrics. But Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees, the immortal disco anthem, is about how life in New York in the 1970s sucked and people often felt lost with no purpose, life going nowhere. Somebody help me. And the only thing they had to fall back on was dancing at the club, feel the city breakin', and everybody's shakin' and we're stayin' alive. Stayin' alive. Story 51. Milne pretty much ruined his son's entire life. Hank Ketchum, the guy that did Dennis the Menace, was an abusive monster. Dennis was drafted during Vietnam, and came back addicted to heroin. He was last seen homeless on the streets of New York and went whereabouts unknown. He's probably buried in a pauper's grave on Hart Island. Story 52. Sea Monkeys. Harold von Braun Hutt was an American mail-order marketer and inventor, most famous as the creator and seller of both the Amazing Sea Monkeys and the X-Ray Specs, along with many other novelty products marketed towards children, often advertised in comic books. Despite his Jewish upbringing, he closely associated with white supremacist groups. He helped buy firearms for a Ku Klux Klan faction in Ohio. He was a regular at the annual Aryan Nations World Congress, where he sometimes had the honor of lighting the cross. Story 53. A big reason the Swedes are all blonde and tall is because they had a massive eugenics program in the 1930s, and those deemed undesirable of looks and traits were sterilized to preserve the Scandi look. Story 54. Nothing we're told by our government isn't swayed or flawed. What ultimately becomes a scam. The food pyramid hanging in our classrooms was just big business telling you what was lagging in sales. Story 55. The practice of leaving out food for Santa Claus, especially if it includes leaving out hay for reindeer, like the Christmas tree. There was an old tradition in Germany of leaving out food and hay for visitors coming in a sleigh and a herd of reindeer, only these visitors were something to be afraid of. Odin Ander, his wife Frigg, and a ghostly horde would participate in a wild hunt at Yule, Odin riding a sleigh pulled by an 8-legged horse, Frigg with her herd of reindeer. If you didn't leave out hay for the reindeer, Frigg may take offense and take your children, especially if they did not behave, perhaps to eat them. Story 56. Rockabye Baby. This popular lullaby is often sung to babies as a sweet, calming song. However, the backstory is dark. The lyrics tell the story of a baby falling from a treetop and hitting the ground, which can be interpreted as a metaphor for a tragic fate. Story 57. The song Shiny Happy People from Rem refers to a Chinese propaganda poster about how happy it is in China, to counter the violence of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Story 58. Everyone praises Lincoln for ending slavery. What you don't know is up until he was killed was he believed whites and blacks could not coexist together and looked into ways to export them all. I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. That I am not, nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermingling with white people. And I will say in addition to this that there is a physical difference between the white and black races which will ever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior. I am as much as any other man in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. He also didn't care about slavery. His goal was to save the Union, and that's it. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or to destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it, and if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it, and if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery, and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union. I have here stated my purpose according to my view of official duty, and I intend no modification of my oft-expressed personal wish that all men everywhere could be free. Story 59. Amish people are supposedly these honest farmers eschewing modern ways. Amish run gigantic puppy mills for big profit. They stack cages floor to ceiling, treating the mom and dad dogs with abject cruelty, never a kind word or a touch. The dogs rescued from Amish poopoe mills are the most traumatized and abused dogs I have ever fostered. We fostered over 220 dogs. One sad, fearful dog would not let me touch him for 3 weeks. Another had to be euthanized because of chronic untreated ear infection for years caused end-stage ear growths, which plugged his ears. SND made him deaf and in constant pain. F the Amish, cruel, greedy animal abusers. Story 60. Marion Zimmer Bradley wrote the amazing feminist uplifting epic novel The Mists of Avalon, a retelling of King Arthur from the women's perspectives. Turns out she was the original Ghislaine Maxwell, who also abused her own daughter. Story 61. Creator of educational children's YouTube channel Blippi got his start making gross-out videos a year before creating Blippi, whence he shat on a naked friend while doing the Harlem Shake. Story 62. The campaign to drink 8 glasses of water a day was begun by Danone to sell those individually packaged water bottles that are now ruining our planet. Story 63. The company that makes Sleepytime tea, Celestial Seasonings, was invented by a weird cult that promotes racism and eugenics as a science, and has integrated their teachings into the branding and marketing strategy of said teas. It's real weird. Story 64. The Chippendales dance scene with Chris Farley on SNL was actually viewed as a negative thing by Chris and the cast afterwards. It was demeaning to his body image and ultimately did him no favors. Story 65. Private swimming pools. Swimming pools used to be only available as public pools, but surprise, only white people were allowed to use them. Once the civil rights movement began peeling away the barriers that kept people of color from swimming in public pools, there was an intense backlash from racists. A famous video shows the owner of a public swimming pool dumping acid into the water to deter black people from swimming there. Eventually some people realized that the best way to keep black people out of a pool is to let people buy a private pool, since you have to have a good deal of money to buy a pool, and most people with that kind of scratch back then were white. Public pools began declining in popularity as private pools became more popular, and while public pools still exist, they're nowhere near as popular as they initially were. Story 66. Alice in Wonderland was written by an adult man, Lewis Carroll, on a boat with 3 young girls. Aimed at one of them, Alice. They enjoyed the whimsical story so much that they said he should write it down. It is heavily implied he was trying to woo the 10-year-old girl. Other girls were 13 and 8 years old, and there were pages of his diary that were removed by his family. His relationship with younger people was seen as unusual at the time, and it was he 30 years old at the time and his friend 24M on the boat with these 3 children, and there was no familial ties. He was good friends with their father, part of the church, and would often have picnics with the family and the girls alone. There was an end to these and a huge falling out between Lewis and Alice's family a year after the boat story. The pages in his diary around this time are torn out. 3 years after the boat story, he did publish Alice in Wonderland. There are implications from his family's journals that he intended to wed Alice or Alice's mother. Story 67. Yeah, and don't forget Piglet's anxiety and Pooh's obsession with honey, which is basically an eating disorder. It's all fun and games until you realize they're a metaphor for a bunch of messed up adults. Makes you wonder what A.A. Milne was going through. Oh. Story 68, not disturbing, just interesting kinda, but as kids in the US, schools teach you about Johnny Appleseed to introduce apples and healthy eating, because an apple a day keeps the doctor away. But the true story is that back then they didn't have strains of apples and you could easily end up with a sour or bad tasting one. The dude was going around planting apple seeds because apples were used for producing booze. Story 69, the real Peter Pan committed suicide by jumping in front of a train. The author of Peter Pan befriended the married mother of 3 boys. Then when she became ill he convinced her to let him adopt them. One was named Peter. 2 of the 3 boys committed suicide. The third died in World War I. There are speculations. Story 70, Horton Hears a Who was written after Dr. Seuss visited a post-World War II Japan and saw people in Hiroshima trying to rebuild their lives, and basically serves as his commentary on the whole interaction between the US and Japan both pre- and post-bombing. Story 71, Band-Aid made everything in Ethiopia worse as the money it raised was given to the government who were responsible for the famine. They used it to violently crush their opposition. People begged Bob Geldof to not do it, but he ignored them. Story 72, the story of the Pied Piper is very loosely based on a serial killer and pederast operating around Hamelin, Germany in the Dark Ages, who would leave warning, dark stuff, the bodies of his child victims cut into pieces and hanging in trees. Story 73, most of the actors who played the Oompa Loompas in Willy Wonka were all from outside of Europe because just a few decades earlier, the Nazis had most of the people with dwarfism put to death. Story 74, John Lennon beat and abused his wives and he also neglected his son Julian. Paul McCartney even wrote the song Hey Jude because he felt sorry for him. Julian even says Paul was a better father to him than his own father was. Story 75, White Christmas was written by, as described in this short article here, Irving Berlin, a Russian Jew ostensibly about the death of his very young newborn child on Christmas Day 1928. You basically couldn't get a bleaker backstory for a beloved Christmas classic. Story 76, Iggle Piggle from In the Night Garden is a dying sailor, blue with cold, facing his unavoidable, lonely demise adrift in the middle of the ocean, far from land and hope of rescue. He admires the beauty of the night sky and acknowledges the vastness of the sea which will claim him. He decides to take down the sail to use for warmth, knowing that he no longer needs it to help him get anywhere, and lights a lamp to aid retrieval of his body, should a boat happen to pass. As he sails towards the garden in the night death, he starts seeing flowers in front of his eyes and hallucinates happier times of running towards his departed friends, who are waiting to greet him in the sunshine. He imagines more and more fanciful things, colorful birds, huge inflatables bouncing along with manic grins, TARDIS-like transportation bigger inside than out until all his friends leave him behind. At the end of the program, Iggle Piggle is of course the last to go to sleep, the last of his crew left. The omniscient narrator reassures him, don't worry, Iggle Piggle, it's time to go, something we would all want to feel in our final moments, and he drops down flat on his back, sailing off into the night back in his little boat. Story 77, Mother Teresa doing what she could to keep poor people poor. As the brilliant Christopher Hitchens put it, she likes poverty and thought it was good for people. To call her a religious fraud would be redundant because all religions are frauds and scams and bamboozles and barbaric cults. If ever there were a religion of peace, the extremists would be extremely peaceful. Story 78, Disney threw lemmings off a cliff into a river in Calgary, while claiming it was making a documentary with the explanation that lemmings jump off cliffs to commit suicide when they are overpopulated. A generation grew up with that false fact in their mind that lemmings were sacrificing themselves to save their species. Nope. Just the crew throwing them off a cliff into a river. Also, Mother Teresa was a vile, vile woman. Story 79, the woman screaming at cat meme. From some Real Housewives of wherever type of show, the woman screaming had just been berated for not turning up to someone's party, and so the woman screaming in the meme is explaining she didn't turn up because she was going through a miscarriage. Story 80, the traditional American breakfast is created by corporations. The complete breakfast was constructed by corporations to increase consumption of American products, eggs, wheat, corn, orange juice, milk. That's why cereal commercials are always a part of a complete breakfast. Story 81, Peter Robbins, the voice actor who played Charlie Brown in A Charlie Brown Christmas and other 60s Peanuts films, was a lifelong sufferer from bipolar disorder who served 4 years in prison and died by suicide. Now you can wish you didn't know that too. Story 82, Teddy Bears. They were originally inspired by President Theodore Roosevelt's refusal to shoot a tied-up bear on a hunting trip. Sounds cute until you realize the bear was already injured and had to be put down anyway. Also, early teddy bears were modeled after real bear cubs and looked way creepier than today's plushies. Story 83, the situation handled by Captain Phillips. The movie made him out to be a saint who stood up for his crew and was a hero in a tense situation. In reality, all captains would have been advised to sail at least 600 miles away from the coast of Somalia to lessen the risk of piracy. Phillips, however, moved the ship within 250 miles of the coast, presumably to cut down on shipping times. Putting your crew's life at risk for the chance of arriving sooner is extremely reckless. Story 84, I just recently watched one of those old claymation Christmas movies with my teen, and it was the one about Santa's backstory, and he was telling all the little children how they had to sit on his lap and give him a kiss if they wanted presents. Them's the rules. Definitely took both my and her wholesome childhood memories and gave us the ick. It comes across so menacing now. It's at the 225 mark in this clip. Story 85 NASA, built on the shoulders of Nazis, the ejector seat, life-saving technology, perfected by many, many deaths, the suffragettes, they handed white feathers to men who refused to fight in World War I. To shame them for doing so, edit, it was World War I, not World War II. Story 86 disturbing is arguable, but Marston, or whoever the guy who created Wonder Woman was, based the character off of his wife and mistress that lived with them. Homes are different everywhere, so if they were all happy, I think it's fine, but that dude made the lie detector, which is something that's actually problematic. Story 87 Mel Blanc, voice actor for Looney Tunes and a whole bunch of other things. He was in a really bad car crash that put him in a coma for a while. He was unresponsive when the doctors tried waking him up. One of his doctors started asking his characters Bugs Bunny and Tweety if they were in there. Mel started responding as the different characters. Anyway, while he was recovering in bed, he was recording Barney for the Flintstones parts of season 23 IRC. His son filled in on a few episodes. Now if I see the Flintstones, I think about how he was doing some of it, in bed, recovering from a bad car wreck. Panda Express is run by Chinese cultists. They push groupthink, force staff to read selected self-help books and much, much more. It's a huge problem almost no one talks about. My wife joined their management team, and the crazy stories I could tell you would fill a book. Others have any experiences with them. I won't give them a penny after what my wife was introduced into. She left before it got extreme, but someone should be looking into them. Story 88 The song, Every Breath You Take by the Police. A lot of people think it's a romantic love song, but it's actually about stalking from the stalker's perspective. Same goes for Zombie by the Cranberries. A lot of people think it's a Halloween song, but it's a protest song written about the young victims of the bombings of Warrington. Story 89 The song Save the Last Dance is made famous by the Drifters, Dolly Parton, Michael Bublé, and others. Was written by Doc Pomus about him and his wife at their wedding. He was in a wheelchair and couldn't dance with her. He just watched her dance with her family friends. Story 90 The Dutch cycling culture. The reason why it exists is, and the problems it covers up are still very problematic. We used to have the same problem as any Western country, cars taking over. 3,000 murders per year through cars. This while having just 13 million inhabitants in the early 1970s. This was the reason for the action called Stop the Kindermoord, Stop the Child Murder. The car infestation was a product of extreme propaganda and lobbyism from the car industry that also destroyed transit in the USA. The number of traffic deaths made the Netherlands by the early 2010s one of the safest countries in traffic in the world. However, more recently we've gotten into mediocrity because of smartphones, pedelecs, but worse, a failing government. This becomes more clear, however, in everything, not just bikes. Hides from the camera. The Netherlands does not have good transit by European standards. The train network is thinly seated even when used intensively. Bus networks across the country have seen severe cuts to become some of the worst in the EU. Tram lines are being cut away right now. Meanwhile, the Netherlands has the widest and most of the widest and busiest freeways in the EU, with many people forced to take cars, and in some cases bicycles, which, unlike NJB's fever dream, is a nightmare in case anything goes wrong. People are being forced into a lockdown for weekends, because they can't use the lacking taxi-like alternatives for bureaucracy and budget cuts. The bicycle is seen as a sacred cow, but when you're disabled, when your bicycle is in shambles, when you have sickle cell anemia, when you have big luggage, you're doomed. There's also blatant ableism in the extra driving tests that can cost hundreds of euros extra compared to able-bodied and neurotypical drivers' experiences. Parking permits are horrendously expensive. Parking may be non-existent, yet we have 16 lanes at Ridderkerk, this country. In Belgium they have a law on basic mobility. In France they expand accessible, modern trams in smaller cities. In Germany there is transit at every corner. In Luxembourg it's free. In Spain it's super dense, frequent, and there's a lot of HSR, which in Italy exists too and is cheap. Trains in Belgium are cheap too. In the Netherlands you pay 30 to go to a place with a slow train that is not remotely near your destination, and one bus stop sets you on 5 further. That is 24,000 rupiah. For S sake, Nickelodeon was a pedophilic hellscape, and we all bought it and built our dumb random personalities around it.